Hey, Colin, enjoy your latest show. Look forward to see where you go with faction play. Carl did a great job with the Orcs with R with his Broken Lands campaign, and we had a lot of fun in that game. So I definitely look forward to hearing how faction play works with your home group. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Hello, I'm Colin Green, and you are listening to Spike Pit.
Hey there, Colin. It's John here from the Dice Diaries. Just been listening to your voicemail greatest hits episode. Your brother mentioned when I spoke to him last that you're playing a Mutant Year Zero Gen Lab Alpha. I've got to admit, I really love the faction play element of it, like yourself. Although, to be honest, I've not got it to the table. I've just read it, but it looks pretty cool. I've got to admit, I like the Mechatron book that they've got. I've got a few of the books, but the Mechatron one, where you sort of play robots that are sort of trying to build themselves into something better, really appeals to me. Probably because I'm a fan of like a lot of the old science fiction, Asimov and Clarke and stuff like that. And there's always robots cropping up in that, and a lot of questions about the identity of the robots and are they sentient, do they have souls, that sort of thing, which I think is quite an interesting subject. And now I'm a big fan of procedural play ever since I really got into it via OSE, so I can certainly see the attraction for that. I've got to say that I enjoyed the call that you played, the old one from Ben Milton, as I was listening to it, and you were discussing his sort of status in the sort of RPG sort of circles. I was thinking, oh, it sounds like he's talking about Ben having a lot of clout, and then just as I was thinking about it, you use precisely that word. So that made me chuckle while I was listening to the episode on my morning walk. Yeah, when it comes to free league games, I've got quite a few of them, but again, I've not really got any to the table. I don't think out of a conscious choice, it's just they don't tend to be the ones that have turned up. But I do want to get Vesson to the table at some point. I mainly purchased that because I got it as part of the Kickstarter for the I forget what it's called, the Mythic Britain and Ireland book that they produced. I was pretty interested in that for obvious reasons, so I bought that and got a copy of the main book and Seasons of Mystery with that as well. Like I say, I know some people love it, some people hate it, but I'd quite like to get that to the table at some point. But as you say, far too many games, far too little time. Anyway, dude, I hope things are going well with you at work and in your personal life. You know, keep on keeping on, dude. Great to hear you putting out stuff again. Keep up the good work, and I will catch you soon. Take care.
And pride of place for this episode goes to my two callers calling in with feedback in response to my episode talking about faction play. They probably need no introduction, but of course we had Jason of Nerds RPG Variety Cast at the top of the show, and followed by my old buddy John Large of the Dice Diaries. Both consummate professionals and GMs and all-round gaming enthusiasts. Always great to hear from these guys. And yeah, the faction play, I've got nothing to report currently, owing to the fact that as the holiday season is upon us, we have decided to, well, we're wrapping up a couple of sessions, campaigns with my face-to-face group, our regular group. We finished up Strahd. We've had a couple of tentative sessions of the Mutant Year Zero Gen Lab Alpha, but decided not to launch fully into that regularly yet because of the disruption that this time of the year tends to bring. Instead, we're playing shorter stuff, and we're going to be getting into a little bit of skirmish gaming and war gaming, but I will get onto that later on. John made some interesting points there and hit on something that is unfortunately going to cost me some money, and that is indeed Mechatron. I've been trying to pick that up on eBay or trying to get it secondhand, but I might have to stump up the full amount and get a copy of that, because I, like John, I am a bit of a fan of robots. We've been playing a couple of games, Reboot in particular, where DM Ricky, who is currently a player at the moment, has been playing a an android, or is he a robot? Basically an artificial life form. And I've been playing a cyborg. So this topic is very much at large in our gaming group. We've been doing a bit more cyberpunk type gaming, and this whole business of sentience and AI and all of that has really bubbled to the surface. And as John says in his calling, it is interesting. It is certainly interesting. The products put out by Free League as well, it's a little bit like Pokemon. You kind of got to collect them all. I'm bad for this. I'm normally pretty good at avoiding this completionist thing of late, but I don't know. Free League have just got their ducks so much in a row for me. The games can be quite punishing, but the production values are really, really second to none. I love all the artwork. On that subject, good looking, John mentions Vason, and now it does unfortunately seem to get some quite mixed reviews. It does seem to be quite a polarizing game, but I don't know. It's absolutely gorgeous, and the topic, the setting, the lore around the game, very much in my wheelhouse. Especially the stuff set here in the British Isles. I don't know. That is tempting, but I think I will have to hold off on that one for now. And perhaps if you're listening, John, and you're running it at some time, that could be something I could definitely get behind. My exploration of the Year Zero engine continues with a vengeance. Played another iteration of it. I think I talked about the fact that I would be playing it, but I've now actually played it. And Care from the Dungeon Musings ran War Stories. It's a World War II take on Mutant Year Zero. I believe it's probably closest to the Twilight 2000 version of the game. And I absolutely loved it. It was a great time. We found ourselves behind enemy lines as I was playing a scout from the 101st Airborne, a kid out of Texas, I believe, worked on a ranch, signed up, found himself liberating France from the Nazis. I spent quite a lot of the session laying in the mud, taking pot shots at Panzer Grenadiers, or might have been Waffen SS, I'm not sure now. We went into a village to recover a tank, and we more or less, we totally flubbed our approach, gave our position away, and came into some fairly stiff resistance. A couple of members of the group had we had a Thompson, and that was capable of fully automatic fire, and that seemed quite effective, particularly in the amount of suppression it could lay down. But when you actually stop and aim, taking single shots, they can be pretty effective as well. I took out a few guys, and then some of the this German patrol fell back to a church. Myself and Carl Rodriguez, who was playing a woman from the French Resistance, I think her name might have been Caroline. We followed these guys into the church, caught them by surprise, managed to get them to surrender. And unfortunately, this village had been suffering quite badly from Allied bombing, trying to shift the Germans from their position. and a stray bomb was chucked against us because the GM in this rule set gets a meta currency to put stuff against us. We were pushing quite a lot of our rolls to try and get successes, and as a consequence he was able to build up a fair number of these points to use against us, and one of them was like a stray bomb that went off. I got caught quite badly in the blast. They flattened the village inn or pub, hostelry, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but there was a bunch of civilians in there, minding their own business, and the place got hit by a bomb. We were in the blast, and then stuff went on. It was quite a fraught encounter with a local who wasn't very happy to see us, who then sort of started hurling abuse at our medic. Punches were thrown. My character then was not going to accept that, basically tackled the guy to the ground, put him on his backside, and then we all decided to leave it at that. As long as he weren't getting up and causing any more trouble, our characters left it at that, and we went on in search of the tank. We crossed the river, found this farmhouse with a barn. Sure enough, there was a tank being worked on with the classic mechanic guy underneath the tank, and then you could hear some sort of noise from the farmhouse and see lights. A couple of Germans came out to have the typical movie scene where the Germans are outside smoking and the Allies are kind of sneaking up, and we caught them unawares. One thing led to another. Barn on fire, destroyed tank, dead Germans, and a few more POWs, and the mission was complete. And we did all this. I think it took 4 hours in total. It was a thoroughly good time. Nice to play with rules that, like I said before, I'm familiar with Mutant Year Zero, and there's enough changes between rule sets to keep it interesting. So I've played Coriolis recently as well. I've mentioned that. So had the opportunity to pick up the Alien rules and the Coriolis rules for half price off a guy on Discord. So they came the other day. I've had a quick look through them. I've read most of the player section of the Alien rules, and you can see, some more changes again. Quite a hard sci-fi setting with some rules a little bit more like Walking Dead, with the stress dice, and mostly what I find changes is what happens when you push the rolls. They seem to play with that a lot to create different effects. I found Coriolis has been the most forgiving on players. I say Alien looks pretty punishing because you get I think every time you push a roll you get stress dice added, and I can see these stress dice adding up pretty quickly. And I think Walking Dead was pretty punishing, and that was the same. But I like it. It's like it's their later games are using the stress dice. I think it might be a little bit more polished, this version, than perhaps you see in Forbidden Lands and Mutant Year Zero, where there's a bit more of a death spiral going on in those games, because the abilities that you're using and pushing kind of degrade, and you get worse and worse at the things you do more often, because inevitably you're going to fail, then you're going to push it, then you're going to kind of build up negatives. But that was kind of what attracted me to it. One of the things with D&D I found is stats and that they are quite static. The only thing changing it is maybe a bit of magic or some magic items, some spells. Every few levels you might get a stat bump, but it's not that dynamic, I don't think. And one of the things that attracted me was this dynamism. So I'm enjoying exploring that in all its different guises. Role-playing and gaming once again in the Warhammer world has reignited my interest in that setting. It's got a long history for me, a childhood fondness that has never left me, and it waxes and wanes like most things. Past couple of weeks I've been really keen to sort out my gaming collection in terms of the miniatures really, and I've been having another push with getting stuff assembled and based up with a view to eventually getting painted or sold or resolved in some way, I guess. And this renewed interest has taken me back to first edition Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Probably you could attribute this to listening to a podcast, Vintage RPG podcast. It was the Vintage RPG podcast. Talking to a guy who wrote a book called Grimdark. It's all about the history of Warhammer 40k and mentions a lot about Brian Ansell. Looking through first edition Warhammer reminds me of how close it was to a role-playing game, in the same way that Dungeons and Dragons sprang from a war game. Warhammer came from an earlier rule set called Reaper, which I've got in my Warhammer box as well. Changed quite a lot actually, changed more than I'd realised looking back. But there was a real emphasis on the fact that this was a game that didn't need to be the game it became later, which was large armies pitted against each other and really quite tournament based play or head to head kind of play. The first edition really emphasises the advantage of having a GM to set the scene. The sample scenario in the rules is a ziggurat with a small number of kind of dwarven heroes pitted against swarms of goblins falling upon this ziggurat. It seems like quite a simple idea, but something I think I'm going to have a go at and play. I'm going to look a little bit more at the idea of role playing with the system. One of the books in the set is the character book, and that really delves into fleshing out characters. Nothing like we would see in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, but you can definitely see the kernel of the idea. The stats basically the same, and a lot of the ideas carry over, and I was surprised how much was actually there. But I think it's quite playable, and it might be an interesting experiment. I then went on to explore and revisit second edition Warhammer, probably the one that is really etched in my brain. I wouldn't say it was the one I necessarily played the most. That's the one that really launched me into Warhammer, and I loved the art. I never actually owned the rule books proper, as it were. Just had a shonky photocopied copy stuck inside an old ring binder. I think my friend had the rules, we borrowed them, my dad got them photocopied, and I carried around. I remember this tatty old black binder with fairly poor photocopies stuck inside it, but it did the trick. I had all the pages were falling out, but I quite liked it. It was all bound up as one big fat volume, and looking back, some of those volumes were quite slim. I think the magic book was maybe only 36 pages. The main rules were, I think, about 65, something like that, 68 perhaps, and then the bestiary was like a kind of really stripped down army lists and monsters, races and monsters. I can't help but feeling that nostalgia for it, and revisiting second edition made me think of some of the scenario packs, and the one that I bought two. I bought Blood on the Streets, the village pack, made the buildings up out of that, I can't remember much of the content in that set except that you could make up this big game of it was kind of like, well, basically football. There's a game of football that still gets played, I believe, in this country, up in Yorkshire or Derbyshire or somewhere like that, where youths and not so young members of the community from each village vie to get some kind of ball or something up to the other end of, I can't remember. It's like a valley with two villages, or a village with two ends. I don't know, but it's quite a distance, and it's like more or less a barely controlled riot of two villages or two sides pitched against each other. I think it's an excuse to kind of get drunk and more or less have a fight in the streets. Believe it still goes on to this day. I can't think what it's called. Can't remember much about it at all. But basically, this was, I believe, the inspiration for this village pack. And there's a few other things going on in there. I think there was 3 villages with ideas of the characters and the locations in them. The one I really remember was Orcs Drift, Bloodbath at Orcs Drift. I've got it somewhere still. I've got a PDF. I've got it somewhere. And it was £6 when it came out. £6. You got a big colour map. You got tokens. If you was missing any miniatures, you had tokens. You had some really nice little buildings, a ruin, a watchtower, an inn, and like a farmhouse. So I think it was 4 buildings, a little outhouse, a little kind of some tents. I want to say there was some tents as well. Anyway, that was that set, and of course it was based on the film Zulu, an alliance of dwarves, elves, and men against a coalition of orc tribes. I think there was 3 orc tribes under an orc leader called Fire, who rode a wyvern, and that was 3 battles. You played out 3 battles, and they led up to a final battle at Orcs Drift. Now, at today's prices, I believe it'd be about £18, and still would have been good value at £18, I think. You had 2 sides at each battle. It could take about, I think, 7 or 8, maybe 9 players, designed for that kind of war games club, I reckon. You have a GM, then you had a blue faction, a red faction. You gave out a command sheet. On it was a explanation of what was going on for that player, their motivations, and their sort of like victory conditions. It was all quite cloak and dagger, hush hush stuff. Quite interesting, little bits of story. The GM normally had some kind of neutral NPC or little character to play, and then the orcs were trying to achieve their mission and sustain as few casualties as possible. The better they did, the more forces they would retain to take on to Orcs Drift. And I think that was the same for the allies. The survivors would show up. I'm not sure that's entirely true. It might have been victory points somehow converted into delays for the orcs and allowed more allies to be at the final battle. Something like that. I can't remember now. Definitely going to give this a go. So going to try and recreate the buildings. Got a feeling I got rid of the originals, but if I still got them, I'd maybe be able to repair them and touch them up a little bit. At the time, these little flat buildings I thought were great. I remember basing them up on more substantial bases, putting a bit of flock on there and liching, little bits of gravel, and it was probably some of the first gaming terrain I ever made, and was chuffed with it. Used it for battle after battle, and like I say, I think they might still be surviving down at my brother's somewhere. But a real trip down memory lane of late, nostalgia up the wazoo, and I've been absolutely loving it. I even went to the effort of finding out what fonts and things like that were used in the early products, because there was Xerox font, I can't remember now, from a daisy wheel printer, and I just kind of quite like the look of them. For me, the art, the font, the layout, it's all part of that, what makes the product what it is, and evokes that feeling of nostalgia, and so simple and not overwrought. It's a joy to look through this old stuff. And I'd say that those books, the 1E, the Forces of Fantasy, they are more or less my equivalent of the Little Brown books, really. First edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle, great stuff. And the cover, you know, the Chaos Knight guy, can't remember what they call him now. Just amazing, just amazing.
And that, as they say, is a wrap. Big thanks goes out to you, the listener, for taking a bit of time out of your day to listen to old Spike Pit. Take care, and I'll catch you later.